The world was still young, tender as a blossom heavy with dew. The sky shone with a fierce, unbroken blue, and beneath it the jungle breathed like a vast green ocean, its canopy shivering with the songs of birds who seemed themselves to be messengers of the gods. This was an age when the earth still remembered the footsteps of its makers, when rivers carried echoes of their voices, and when every stone, every tree, every breath of wind trembled with the sacred weight of creation. In those days men still walked close to the gods. The smoke of burning copal rose ceaselessly into the heavens, drifting like pale serpents across the sky, and the stars themselves flickered in answer, as though drinking the offerings of incense and blood. Lineage was not merely flesh and blood but destiny, a thread spun and knotted by divine hands. Among the greatest of these destinies was the lineage of the twins, born of the union of Hun Batz, the father who had descended into Xibalba, and Ixquic, the maiden who bore the spark of renewal. From that sacred bloodline were born two elder brothers, not yet heroes, not yet warriors, not yet tested by the trials of the underworld, but bearers of a different fire, the fire of art. Their names resounded in the memory of the people like drumbeats in the night: Hun Batz and Hun Chaouen. Hun Batz, the elder, carried eyes as deep as cenotes, filled with hidden light, and hands swift and cunning as water serpents. Even in childhood, before he could yet hold a reed stylus with strength, he traced shapes in the dust, shapes that seemed to stir with breath, shapes that startled the ants and lizards who watched from the cracks of stone. When he sang, the air changed. Birds gathered on the branches to hear him. The forest itself hushed, as though every leaf bent to listen. Hun Chaouen, his brother, was no less gifted. His body moved like the swaying branches of the ceiba in the wind. He was laughter and rhythm, his feet striking the ground in patterns that echoed the heartbeat of the earth. When he danced, it was as if the sun itself swayed upon his shoulders. Together the brothers became keepers of beauty, guardians of harmony, and the first teachers of men in the mysteries of paint, glyph, rhythm, and song. They were not ordinary children. Their father, Hun Batz, had tasted both triumph and death in the shadowed courts of Xibalba. His skull had given birth to seed. His sacrifice had watered the soil of destiny. From such a father no sons could be common. Hun Batz and Hun Chaouen carried in their blood not only the memory of his laughter but also the echo of his suffering, and in their gifts of music and art burned the promise of eternity. The old women of the villages would whisper, rocking by the fires at night, "They do not walk alone. Shadows follow them. Spirits watch them. The breath of the gods rides their shoulders." And indeed, when Hun Batz lifted a flute of hollow cane to his lips, the trees bent their limbs to catch its sound. When Hun Chaouen struck a drum, jaguars halted mid-step, golden eyes gleaming in the half-light, their tails curling like smoke in the air. The jungle itself seemed to recognize them as brothers of the divine. Yet theirs was not the only branch of the lineage. For from the same bloodline came others, two younger ones, destined for another kind of greatness. They were Hun Batz and Ixbalanque, the hero twins whose deeds would thunder through ages. Unlike their elder brothers, their gift was not art but cunning, not song but the sharpness of wit and the strength to challenge the lords of death themselves. Thus beneath the young sky rose two pairs of brothers, one of harmony, one of conflict, one whose destiny was beauty and another whose fate was battle. They shared the same roots, yet already the seeds of difference sprouted between them. The grandmothers of the people sang a warning in their chants. From the same stalk of maize, different ears are born. One will be eaten, another saved, another cast into the fire. yet all come from the same root. The lineage of twins was woven with light and shadow, with laughter and with pain. And though the arts of Hun Batz and Hun Chowan shone like torches in the dawn of the world, the deep earth beneath them stirred with another rhythm. The lords of Xibalba whispered in their caverns, their laughter curling like smoke in the dark, already weaving snares of envy and fate. The rivers murmured it. The sabres knew it. The monkeys in the canopy shrieked as though they had glimpsed it in dreams, that nothing born of gods and men remains untouched by trial. Even gifts as luminous as art would one day be shadowed. And in the sacred dance of the Brothers of Dawn, one among them, Hun Batz, would step from the circle of man into the spiral of myth, through jealousy, transformation, and the eternal rebirth of art itself. The dawn stretched its fingers across the jungle, painting the leaves with gold. Mist clung to the branches of the sabres like the breath of unseen spirits, and the rivers murmured softly as though chanting a hymn in their own secret tongue. It was in such mornings that Hun Batz revealed his power. Hun Batz was not a warrior, nor did he hunger for conquest. His strength lay elsewhere, in the precision of his hands, the clarity of his voice, the rhythm of his step. He was the first to teach men that the world could be shaped not only with stone or blade, but with symbols. He knew the secret of line, of curve, of color. With a reed dipped in pigment ground from roots and minerals, he drew upon bark and plaster, weaving glyphs that carried the weight of eternity. The people gathered to watch him. Children sat wide-eyed at his feet as he traced stories upon the earth. A serpent coiled in thunder, a maize stalk rising from the soil, the sun with its blazing face. But these were not merely drawings, they were invocations. With each line he called the essence of the thing itself. The serpent stirred in the dust, the maize seemed to breathe, the sun warmed the very air. Hun Batz's voice was another mystery. When he sang, it was as if the threads of the sky quivered. His songs rose like smoke toward the heavens, and the birds answered him, weaving their calls into his melodies. The people began to believe that every bird in the jungle was his disciple, that the parrots, the toucans, the nightingales had all learned their voices from him. And when Hun Batz danced, the ground itself became an altar. His movements were not random but carried the weight of cycles. The rise of the moon, the fall of the stars, the path of the sun through the underworld. Each gesture was a prayer, each turn a story. Men and women imitated him, and from his body the first dances of the people were born. Hun Chowan walked beside him, his laughter a counterpoint, his drumming a heartbeat for his brother's melodies. Together they shaped the arts of humanity, song, rhythm, dance, painting, glyph. These were not mere pleasures. They were bridges between men and gods. For through art, the people learned to speak to the unseen, to honor the ancestors, to remember. The rituals of Hun Batz spread across the villages. At night, fires blazed in courtyards as men painted their faces with ash and pigment, moving their bodies in patterns taught by the brothers. Women sang as they ground maize, their voices rising like offerings with the smoke of burning copal. Children traced glyphs in the sand, dreaming of worlds that lived beyond their own. And so Hun Batz became a master, not of war but of memory. His gift was permanence. What was spoken might vanish with the wind, but what was painted endured. What was danced carved itself into the souls of those who watched. The people began to call him scribe of the gods, singer of the first dawn, keeper of harmony. Yet the jungle is never silent, never simple. Beneath the beauty shadows stirred. The younger brothers, Hunahpu and Ixbalanque, watched him. They saw how the people adored Hun Batz, how they bowed their heads when he sang, how they repeated his glyphs with trembling reverence. The hero twins possessed other gifts, cleverness, strength, the cunning of the ball game, but their arts were of a different kind. In the eyes of men, Hun Batz and Hun Chowan shone brighter, for their gifts could be seen, heard, celebrated. And so in the heart of beauty, the seed of envy began to grow. But Hun Batz in those days knew nothing of shadows. He painted, he sang, he danced. He gave his gifts freely, believing they would last forever. When the flutes breathed, when the drums thundered, when the torches flickered against the painted walls of temples, he felt himself part of the great order of creation. He felt immortal. Yet even gods of art are bound to fate. The jungle, though endless, does not hide everything. In the weave of its vines and the endless chatter of its birds, there are always secrets that slip through. And so it was with the brothers. Their laughter, their dances, their songs were known by all, but so too were the murmurs that stirred beneath them. Hun Batz and Hun Chowan had become the torchbearers of beauty. Villages celebrated their presence. Hunters paused in their work to listen when Hun Batz raised his flute. Women smiled when Hun Chowan struck the drum, his rhythm rippling through the air like thunder through the hills. Children chased each other in games shaped by their dances, drawing their glyphs in the dust. Everywhere their influence grew. But in the shadows, two younger brothers watched. Hunahpu and Ixbalanque, sharp-eyed, quick, restless as the jaguars that prowled the forest paths at night. They bore another destiny, one that belonged not to painting or song, but to the great game, to wit, to the dangerous crossings between life and death. Yet as the days passed, they began to notice how the people looked not at them, but at their elder brothers. In the flicker of firelight, they saw men bowing to Hun Batz, offering him food, asking him to inscribe their prayers in glyphs. They heard the chants of women praising the harmony he brought, the colors he gave to their world. And in the whispers of children they caught a sting. Hun Batz is the singer of the gods. Hun Chowan is the dancer of the earth. What will Hunahpu and Ixbalanque be? It was a question that festered. The hero twins, though still young, carried in their blood the echo of destiny. They would one day descend into the halls of Xibalba, where laughter is sharpened into cruelty and games end in death. Their path was not one of adoration, but of trial. Yet they were still boys, boys with pride, with yearning, with the sting of comparison biting at their hearts. The elders told stories by the fireside, how Hun Batz could sing down the rain, how his glyphs kept memory alive, how his dances turned the very air into prayer. Hunahpu clenched his fists in silence. Ixbalanque, quick of tongue, muttered that beauty was nothing without action, that glyphs could not strike down the lords of the underworld, nor could songs defend the maize from famine. But beneath his words was envy, sharp and heavy. Hun Batz noticed little of this at first. His world was full of music, of color, of the patient work of teaching men how to remember. Yet sometimes, when he raised his head from painting a wall with bright glyphs of maize and serpent, he caught the eyes of his younger brothers watching him, dark, measuring, distant. At night, when the fires dimmed and the stars glittered like countless eyes in the sky, whispers moved like serpents through the village. Hun Batz is favored. Hun Batz is chosen. Hun Batz is greater than the others. And words, even whispered, are seeds. They fall into hearts, they take root, they grow in silence. Hunahpu and Ixbalanque began to plot little games, cruel in their smallness, meant to test their elder brothers. A tool misplaced here, a mockery whispered there. They teased Hun Chowan, imitated Hun Batz's songs in high, shrill voices until the listeners laughed. Hun Batz tried to smile through it to continue his work, but the sting remained. The gods above and below watched in silence. They knew what men and boys did not, that envy is a fire that never burns alone. It consumes not only the one who feels it but also the one who receives it. It reshapes destinies. It sharpens paths. It whispers to fate itself. And so, in the silence between flute and drum, between paintbrush and dance, something dark began to breathe. The harmony of the brothers was no longer whole. Soon it would break. It began with laughter. Not the gentle laughter of joy, nor the laughter of children chasing each other through the maize fields. It was sharper, mocking, the kind of laughter that pierces deeper than any blade. Hunahpu and Ixbalanque, restless and cunning, had grown tired of watching their elder brothers bask in admiration. They whispered to each other beneath the sabas, their voices quick as the darting of snakes. "Let us test them," said Hunahpu, eyes glinting like obsidian. "Let us play a game that will reveal their pride." The next morning, when the mist still clung to the leaves and the dew shone like drops of jade, the hero twins called out to Hun Batz and Hun Chowan. "Come," they said, "let us go to the mountains where the fruits are sweetest, where the monkeys leap among the branches. There is food enough for all." Hun Batz, trusting, gathered his paints and flutes, thinking the day would be one of laughter, of shared joy. Hun Chowan followed, humming under his breath. Together they entered the forest, the canopy whispering above them, shadows thick and heavy. But the twins had prepared a snare. They led their elder brothers to a tree so tall it seemed to pierce the heavens, its trunk wide, its branches like arms of a giant stretching out to embrace the sky. At its top, fruits glowed golden in the sunlight, tempting, perfect. "Climb," said Hunahpu, smiling. "Climb and taste what waits above." Hun Batz, agile, set his flute aside and began the ascent. His hands gripped bark, his feet sought holds. Chowan followed, laughing, calling out at how sweet the fruit must be. But as they climbed, the tree began to grow. It stretched higher and higher, its trunk lengthening, its branches rising. The earth fell away beneath them. What had been a few moments of climbing became an endless journey upward. From below, the hero twins shouted, "Why do you not leap like the monkeys? Why do you not dance in the branches?" Their voices rose in mockery, cruel as whips. "Show us your grace, artists of the world." The words burned. Hun Batz tried to laugh them off, but the sound caught in his throat. He felt his hands trembling against the bark. The air thickened. The fruit above seemed farther away with every reach. And then it began. First, his fingers stiffened, curling until they no longer grasped the tree as hands, but clung as hooked claws. Hair sprouted along his arms, coarse and dark, spreading down to his chest. His feet bent and twisted, gripping not like human feet but like the limbs of a creature born to swing through branches. His voice, once clear and melodic, cracked into shrieks, echoing through the canopy. Hun Chowan cried out in terror as his own body followed, his laughter twisting into guttural cries. The people below, hearing the sound, turned their faces upward. What they saw was not the graceful artists, not the beloved masters of glyph and song, but shapes twisting among the branches, faces lengthened, eyes wide, bodies hunched and covered in fur. "Monkeys." The hero twins pointed, their laughter ringing like thunder. "See how they leap now. See how they swing." Their mockery cut deeper than blades, but it was also prophecy. For in that moment, Hun Batz and Hun Chowan were no longer men, no longer teachers, no longer brothers. They were the first howler monkeys of the jungle, forever bound to the trees. Yet even in their shrieks, the echo of art remained. Their cries were not meaningless. They were rhythms, wild and piercing, carrying through the canopy like the beat of drums. Their movements, though awkward at first, became dances, arcs of motion that traced stories in the air. Their faces, though covered in fur, still bore the wisdom of scribes. The people, frightened, whispered, "It is punishment. It is curse." But the elders, watching more closely, shook their heads. No, it is transformation. The gods do not erase. They reshape. And so the monkeys came to be sacred. Their cries were understood as songs of the divine. Their leaping bodies became symbols of dance, of performance, of the restless spirit of creation. Where men saw mockery, the gods had given symbol. Hun Batz had not died. He had changed. The jungle never forgot that moment. Even now, when dusk settles over the trees and the howler monkeys begin their chorus, their cries are not mere noise. They are echoes of Hun Batz, the god transformed, the artist eternal. The forest was never silent again. From the day Hun Batz and Hun Chowan leapt and shrieked among the high branches, their cries filled the canopy. The people trembled at first, covering their ears, whispering that it was a curse, a punishment sent by jealous gods. Yet as nights passed and mornings broke, the cries became more than noise. They became rhythm. They became song. At dawn, when the first shafts of sunlight pierced through the mist and touched the earth, the monkeys sang. Their voices rose like a storm swelling in the horizon, deep, guttural, endless. The sound reverberated through the valleys, shaking leaves from branches, startling parrots into flight. To some it was frightening. To others it was a reminder. But to the wise it was revelation. The elders gathered the people and spoke. Do not hide from their voices. Do not call it curse. These are not the cries of beasts. These are the songs of Hun Batz and Hun Chowan, who gave us art, who gave us memory. Their forms are changed, but their gifts remain. The gods do not destroy. They transform. What was human is now divine. And so the howler monkeys became sacred beings, guardians of the arts. Their cries at dawn were honored as ancestral music, the first percussion of the jungle. Their leaping bodies were seen as the eternal dance. Their agile hands, now furred and clawed, were remembered as the hands that had once painted the glyphs of creation. Hun Batz, though transformed, did not vanish from the lives of men. When a scribe lifted his brush to inscribe glyphs upon the bark of a embody, he whispered Hun Batz's name, asking for steady hands. When a singer raised her voice at the hearth, she prayed that Hun Batz would carry her melody into the ears of the gods. When dancers stamped their feet in rhythm around the sacred fires, they believed that Hun Batz leapt invisibly among them, guiding their movements. The hero twins, though triumphant in their trick, could not erase him. They laughed at the transformation, but they did not foresee how the people would revere the monkeys. For even in mockery, fate had been written, and Hun Batz had become immortal, not through temples or conquest, but through sound, symbol, and memory. Generations passed. Temples rose from the jungle, their steps steep, their walls carved with glyphs. On those walls, artists painted figures with the tails and faces of monkeys, adorned with feathers, holding brushes and drums. These were no mere animals. They were the divine scribes, the lords of art, the transformed brothers whose story pulsed in every line of paint, in every thud of drum, in every cry that rolled from the treetops. To this day, the monkeys of the Maya world are not only creatures of flesh and fur. They are symbols. They are memory. They are Hun Batz, reminding humanity that beauty and creation are born not only of triumph but of loss, not only of pride but of transformation. For the gods are not always merciful, and destiny is not always kind. Yet even in mockery, even in downfall, the sacred can be born. Hun Batz, once man, became more than man. He became the eternal voice of the jungle, the patron of art, the spirit who teaches that creation is never destroyed, it only changes shape. And so the first chapter of his tale closes not with silence, but with a cry, a deep, thunderous howl rolling through the forest at dawn. A cry that is at once grief and celebration, curse and blessing, the eternal song of a god reborn. The jungle has its own language. At dawn, before the fires are lit and before the first maize is ground, the forest speaks. The cicadas rattle their wings in waves, frogs croak from hidden pools, parrots screech their colors into the sky. But above them all, deep and resonant, come the cries, the howls that roll like thunder over the treetops. To the uninitiated, those howls are terror. They rise from nowhere, long, guttural, heavy with an almost human anguish. Travelers from far lands, upon hearing them, freeze in place. Their hearts pound as the cries surge and fall, shaking the air as if the forest itself were groaning. They look into the canopy, half expecting to see not beasts, but spirits tearing the sky open with their voices. And in a sense they are not wrong. For the Maya knew the truth, those voices were not merely animal calls. They were the echoes of Hun Batz, the transformed brother, the god of art in his new skin. The monkey's howls were not chaos but song, ancestral music, sacred rhythm, a voice that spoke both grief and creation. Every morning when the first cries shivered through the mist, the people took it as a sign. Farmers sharpening their obsidian tools paused and bowed their heads. Mothers grinding maize on the metate murmured a prayer. Priests lifted their eyes toward the canopy, inhaling the cries as if they were smoke rising from an unseen altar. And when night fell, and the cries thundered once more beneath the rising moon, torches were lit in the courtyards. Dancers painted their bodies, wrapping their limbs in feathers and jaguar skins. Drums were struck, flutes were raised, and the people moved in circles, mimicking the leaping shapes of monkeys in the branches. Each cry from the jungle was woven into the rhythm, as if Hun Batz himself were guiding them, his invisible hands still shaping song and motion. Children grew up with the story. Their mothers whispered it into their ears. The monkeys you hear are not mere beasts. They are Hun Batz and Hun Chowan who gave us our dances, our songs, our glyphs. Listen to them and you will learn. Disrespect them and you will be cursed. Hun Batz, once a man among brothers, had become something greater, an eternal presence, a teacher not of flesh but of voice. His cries reminded men of their own fragility, their own pride, their own envy. But they also reminded them of beauty, that art is born not only from triumph, but from transformation. The jungle itself became a temple. Every tree was a column, every branch an altar, every cry a hymn. And Hun Batz, though unseen, walked among them still. The cries of Hun Batz were not left unanswered. The Maya knew that the voice of a god, even one veiled in fur and shadow, demanded reply. And so they built rituals to weave his sound into the rhythm of human life. In the plazas before the temples, where white limestone shone under the blaze of the sun, men and women gathered as night fell. The air filled with the smell of burning copal, thick and sweet, rising in plumes that curled toward the heavens. Priests daubed their faces with soot and ochre, drawing glyphs of monkeys across their cheeks and foreheads. Children wore masks carved from wood, painted with wide eyes and open mouths, imitating the cries of the canopy. At the center of the gathering, drums began their heartbeat. Low, steady, resonant, like the pulse of the earth itself. The people stamped their feet in unison, each step sending a tremor into the stones, into the bones of the world. Flutes joined, their voices high and piercing, calling out like the cries of birds. And then, beneath it all, came the howls, the long, throbbing voices of the monkeys in the trees, echoing through the night. The dancers moved in circles. Their arms bent, their legs leapt, their bodies twisted in mimicry of Hun Batz's sacred transformation. They were not mocking but remembering, not deriding but honoring. Each movement carried the weight of the myth, the climb into the tree, the laughter of the twins, the sudden shudder of change, the leap into the branches, the first cry of the monkey god. And always the priests stood apart, their hands raised, their voices chanting. They recited the lineage of Hun Batz, calling his name into the smoke, reminding all that he had once been a man, that he had once traced glyphs with hands not covered in fur, that his blood was the same blood that ran through theirs. Sometimes when the ritual reached its height, blood was offered. Not in cruelty but in covenant. Men pierced their ears with obsidian, letting drops fall into bowls of water painted with glyphs. Women pricked their tongues, their blood-soaking strips of paper that were then burned in the fire. The smoke rose as an offering, a bridge between the people and the transformed God. And in the silence after the chants, when the fire crackled low and the drums had ceased, the forest answered. The howler monkeys lifted their voices, their cries rolling through the night like waves of thunder. The people bowed their heads. They knew the god had heard. Hun Batz was not a forgotten figure, not a relic lost to time. He lived in every ritual, in every mask carved to resemble his face, in every glyph etched onto temple walls. He was memory itself, wrapped in sound and movement. To paint was to invoke Hun Batz. To sing was to echo Hun Batz. To dance was to walk his path of transformation. And so long as the rituals endured, so did he. Not all gods carve their names in thunder. Some inscribe them quietly, in lines and curves that endure long after voices fade. Hun Batz was such a god. Though his form was transformed, his essence remained. The hand that drew, the memory that wrote, the scribe who ensured that nothing sacred would be forgotten. The Maya said that when a scribe dipped his brush into black pigment, it was Hun Batz who steadied his wrist. When the lines flowed clean and true, curving into serpents or blooming into maize, it was because Hun Batz whispered in the silence. His presence hovered in every glyph, in every codex, in every mural painted on the plastered walls of temples. In the dim light of workshops, scribes bent over sheets of bark paper smoothed and coated with lime. They ground pigments from minerals, plants, and the wings of insects, mixing blues as deep as the sky, reds like fresh blood, yellows like the maize itself. With brushes of animal hair bound to reeds, they traced figures onto the white surface. A maize god rising from the earth. A serpent coiled in lightning. A priest lifting a bowl of jade. But always, somewhere hidden, there was the monkey. Hun Batz, drawn with his fur, his tail, his wide, knowing eyes, sometimes dancing, sometimes writing, sometimes seated with a brush in hand. He was not erased by his transformation. He was made eternal in pigment. The scribes believed he walked among them as shadow. They offered him the first strokes of every work, whispering his name before they dared draw. Guide my hand, Hun Batz. Guard my memory. Let no glyph falter. For to paint wrongly was not a small error, It was to fracture meaning, to lose truth, to anger the gods. When new codices were blessed, priests held them high in the smoke of burning copal and invoked Hun Batz, patron of writing. They said that as the monkey howled in the canopy, so too did he call out from the painted pages, his voice hidden in curves of ink. And when scribes died, their brushes and pigments were buried with them, for their journey to the underworld was not empty. Hun Batz would be waiting, ready to guide their hands once more in the endless halls of Xibalba. Thus Hun Batz became more than a figure of story. He became the silent companion of every hand that recorded, of every mind that remembered. To write was not merely to preserve, it was to commune. Each glyph was a doorway, each curve of ink a breath from the God who had given mankind the gift of art. In temples, on stelae, on the very bones of kings, Hun Batz's spirit endured. Not in flesh, not in stone, but in the language of lines, symbols, colors, and song. Hun Batz was no longer only a voice in the trees. He was the eternal scribe of the gods. No god is ever simple. The Maya understood this with the clarity of those who live close to mystery. Every god was both blessing and danger, both giver and taker, both light and shadow. Hun Batz was no exception. On one hand he was beloved, the scribe who gave men their glyphs, the singer who taught them melody, the dancer who guided their feet. To invoke Hun Batz was to call down beauty, to let the spirit of art flow like water through the human soul. Every painter who traced a wall, every musician who lifted a flute, every dancer who bent their body in rhythm was in some way his child. But Hun Batz's story carried another current, darker and sharper. For he had not been transformed without reason. His change into monkey form was not merely the cruelty of brothers. It was also the price of pride. The elders reminded the youth, Hun Batz was gifted, but he forgot humility. He held his art above his brothers. He let adoration fill his heart. And so fate reshaped him. In their telling, the transformation was not only trickery but justice, a warning that beauty without balance becomes arrogance, and arrogance leads to downfall. Thus Hun Batz was both patron and caution. To honor him was to embrace art with reverence. To forget his story was to risk his fate. When scribes grew too proud of their skill, elders warned them, beware, or you too will climb the tree and fall into the branches, howling in shame. When dancers mocked others, the priests reminded them that Hun Batz's leap had once been laughter twisted into curse. And yet, this duality was not condemnation, it was balance. For the Maya, the world itself was woven of dual faces, day and night, life and death, maize sprouting and maize withering, joy and grief. Hun Batz embodied this truth. He was beauty born of downfall, art born of punishment, song born of sorrow. When howler monkeys shrieked in the canopy, the people heard both voices at once, the call of inspiration and the cry of warning. The sound was not merely music but memory, memory of a brother mocked, of a god reshaped, of pride humbled and turned into eternal gift. In this way, Hun Batz's dual nature shaped the very soul of the arts. The painter learned discipline, the singer learned humility, the dancer learned respect. Art was never to be taken lightly. It was sacred. It was dangerous. It was Hun Batz. And so his name was spoken with both love and fear, both gratitude and trembling. For in the world of the Maya, even beauty had teeth. Night had fallen heavy upon the jungle. The torches guttered in temple courtyards, their smoke curling upward like ghostly serpents, and the last songs of the day had faded into silence. Yet the people did not sleep, for they knew what came next. From the deep black canopy came the sound. A single cry at first, long and hollow, tearing through the air like the splitting of stone. Then another joined it, and another, until the night itself trembled with the chorus. The howls of the monkeys rose into the sky, their voices rolling like distant thunder, cresting and breaking like waves upon an unseen shore. The people bowed their heads. They knew who spoke. This was Hun Batz, not as he had been but as he was now, eternal, transformed, hidden in the branches of the world. His cries were not only sound but reminder. They told of his pride, of his fall, of his rebirth as sacred voice. They told of the power of art, born of sorrow and made everlasting in rhythm, pigment, and song. Children, listening, clutched their blankets and whispered, "It is Hun Batz. He is speaking." Elders, with eyes clouded by age, nodded and replied, "Yes. He will speak for as long as the world remembers." And the priests, kneeling in the courtyards, lifted bowls of copal toward the cries, letting the smoke rise to meet the invisible God in the trees. But Hun Batz's voice was not confined to the jungle. It lived wherever men created. When scribes bent over their codices, they heard him in the silence between brushstrokes. When dancers stamped their feet upon temple stones, they felt him in the pulse of the drum. When singers lifted their voices in the plaza, they carried his echo upon their tongues. Even storms bore his presence. When lightning cracked and thunder rolled across the sky, people whispered that Hun Batz was leaping among the clouds, shrieking his eternal song. His voice was not bound to one form, one place, one time. It was woven into the very fabric of existence. And so his myth endured, not as a story of punishment alone, not as tragedy but as a revelation, that art is never destroyed, that memory is never lost, that the voice of a god can live in monkeys, in scribes, in dancers, in storms, in every breath of creation. Hun Batz had become the eternal echo, the sound that linked men to gods, the cry that reminded them of beauty and of humility. A reminder that every gift carries its price, and every downfall can be transformed into everlasting song. And in the darkest hours before dawn, when the jungle seemed a single vast breath, the howls rang out again. Unbroken. Eternal. Hun Batz was there. Hun Batz would always be there. The Maya did not keep stories as mere tales. To them, myth was mirror, lesson, and law. Every god's path was a reflection of human destiny, and every transformation was a map for how to live. Hun Batz's fate was no exception. Children learned early that his cry was more than a sound in the canopy, was a teaching. The elders would say, "Do you hear the monkeys at dawn? That is Hun Batz. He reminds us, talent without humility becomes pride, and pride leads to downfall. But even in downfall, creation is not lost, it is reborn." This paradox was at the heart of Maya thought. To live was to walk a fragile thread between light and shadow, creation and destruction, pride and humility. Hun Batz was both sides at once, the god of art and the warning against arrogance, the giver of glyphs and the victim of envy, the one who fell and the one who rose eternal. In his story the people saw themselves. A farmer might see his own pride when boasting of his maize harvest. A warrior might see his own arrogance after victory. A scribe might see the danger of exalting his hand above the gods. And yet, Hun Batz's transformation also carried hope. For if even a fall could be remade into something divine, then no mistake was without meaning. The priests used his myth as balance in their teachings. In rituals, his name was invoked beside others, not as conqueror, not as hero of battles, but as reminder that creation is woven from both joy and sorrow. He was the face of art, yes, but also the face of consequence. And so Hun Batz's place in the cosmos was clear, not as a god of triumph but as a god of balance. His story was written into the very philosophy of the Maya, whispered in prayers, carved into glyphs, carried in the voices of the jungle. He was not forgotten. He was not erased. He was a thread, thin, fragile, luminous, stretching between the world of men and the world of gods. The Maya world was a living cycle. Nothing existed alone. Every dawn carried the memory of night. Every harvest was born from seeds buried in darkness. Every life walked hand in hand with death. To the Maya, the cosmos itself was a weaving, threads pulled taut across the loom of time, forming patterns of balance. Hun Batz's story became one of those patterns. His life was a cycle in miniature, mirroring the eternal rhythm of creation. He had been gifted. He had risen. He had fallen. He had been transformed. Yet from that fall came something greater. Art renewed, voice eternal, memory unbroken. This was not destruction. It was balance. Priests spoke of it in their chants. As maize rises, so it falls. As sun rises, so it sets. As Hun Batz fell, so his voice was lifted. Thus is the weaving of the world. Hun Batz became a living parable of the maize itself. Like maize, he grew in glory, golden and tall, admired and beloved. Like maize, he was cut down, humbled, taken from his form. And like maize, he returned transformed, reborn as nourishment, as song, as cry, as art. The balance was everywhere. His monkey form, far from humiliation, was itself a symbol of the cycle. Laughter and sorrow bound together, chaos and rhythm entwined. The howler's cry was both agony and music, reminding all that nothing in life was pure light or pure darkness. Farmers, planting seeds in the soil, whispered prayers to Hun Batz as well as to the maize god. They asked that their harvest, like his story, endure both fall and rebirth. Warriors, before stepping into battle, remembered his fate, learning that pride could undo even the strongest. Scribes, painting glyphs, prayed not only for skill but for humility, lest they repeat his fall. Thus Hun Batz was no longer only patron of artists. He was a guardian of balance itself. His myth was a compass, reminding all who heard it that every gift, every victory, every joy must be tempered with humility, for the cycle always turns. And when storms swept through the jungle, bending trees and tearing leaves, people listened for the howler's cries echoing in the wind. They said it was Hun Batz weaving the storm into song, binding destruction and creation in one voice. Hun Batz was not simply remembered. He was lived. His story became the rhythm of breath itself. Inhale and exhale, rise and fall, pride and humility, death and rebirth. The balance of creation was not distant, not abstract. It was in the monkey's howl at dawn. It was in the glyph painted on bark. It was in the dance of firelight on temple stone. And Hun Batz was its keeper. The Maya did not see animals as mere beasts. Every creature that moved across the earth, swam in the rivers, or leapt through the trees carried within it the breath of the divine. Each had its way, its spirit double, its hidden connection to gods and men. Among them, none were more mysterious, more sacred than the monkeys. The monkey was laughter and sorrow at once. Its face, with wide eyes and solemn brow, seemed almost human, as if mocking and mirroring mankind. Its voice was terrifying, booming across the forest canopy with a depth that shivered the bones. Its body leapt with grace through the branches, dancing above the heads of men as though defying the gravity that bound mortals to the soil. When Hun Batz was transformed, the monkey was forever changed as well. It became sacred, the living image of his story, the moving symbol of art, pride, fall, and rebirth. To see a monkey was to be reminded of the God who had once been man. To hear its cry was to hear both warning and blessing. Hunters, stepping into the jungle with bows and obsidian-tipped arrows, avoided the monkeys. To kill one was taboo, a violation that could anger Hun Batz himself. The cries of the monkeys were considered omens. If they called loudly as a hunter passed, it meant the forest was watching, and the gods might judge his steps. Artists and scribes sought their likeness. In temples, painted murals showed monkeys holding brushes, seated in postures of writing or playing drums and flutes. Stone carvings depicted them dancing, their tails curling like glyphs, their faces frozen in masks of both comedy and solemnity. These were not caricatures, they were invocations. The monkey was the god alive, dwelling in the trees, watching mankind with wide, eternal eyes. During festivals, dancers wore monkey masks of wood and clay, painted with bright pigments. They leapt across the courtyards, imitating the shrieks and swings of the canopy. The people laughed, not in mockery but in reverence. For in that laughter was remembrance. The laughter of the hero twins, the laughter that had sparked the transformation, the laughter that had become eternal echo. Children were taught to respect the monkeys. Mothers would point to the branches at dawn, when the howls shook the forest, and say, "That is Hun Batz speaking. Bow your head. Listen well." For even if the words were hidden, the meaning was there. Respect creation, honor art, guard humility, for all gifts come from the gods. And so the monkey became more than animal. It was the sacred mask of Hun Batz, the living reminder of his presence. To this day, in the shadow of the sabas and the chorus of the canopy, the howler monkey is not only beast but ancestor, teacher, guardian of art and balance. Hun Batz did not vanish when he was transformed. He multiplied. He became legion in the trees, a god who could not be erased. The laughter of Hunahpu and Ixbalanque still echoed long after the tree had grown, long after Hun Batz and Hun Chowan had leapt into their new forms. But laughter, in the world of the Maya, was never without weight. Words, sounds, even mockery carried power. They wove themselves into the fabric of fate. The hero twins thought their trick a victory. They had humbled their elder brothers, stripped them of adoration, left them swinging in the canopy as beasts. But what they did not see was how their act bound them as well, tying their destiny to Hun Batz's voice. For the people remembered. They remembered the cruelty as much as the transformation. The story was told around the fires. Hunahpu and Ixbalanque mocked Hun Batz. Their laughter turned his gift into fur and fong. But the gods reshaped it into art eternal. The twins gave birth to the howls, and so the howls will follow them. And indeed, as the hero twins grew older, as they walked toward their own trials, the cries of the monkeys haunted them. On nights before great challenges, the forest filled with shrieks, deep and mournful, echoing through their dreams. Some said Hun Batz was watching them. Others said he was warning them. Still others believed he was laughing still, turning their own cruelty back upon them. The priests saw deeper. They said that without the fall of Hun Batz, the hero twins could never have walked their path. The mockery was not accident, it was part of the weaving. By stripping Hun Batz of his place, they forced him into transformation, and by doing so they revealed their own role, not as masters of art, but as players in the great game of death and rebirth. The shadows of Hun Batz clung to them as they entered Xibalba. In the ball courts of the underworld, where skulls lined the walls and the lords of death laughed with mouths full of ash, the echoes of monkeys followed. When the twins triumphed, the cries rang through the jungle as though Hun Batz himself was answering. When they faltered, the cries deepened, mocking them as they had once mocked him. The people listening to these stories understood. Hun Batz and the hero twins were forever entwined. Their fates were not separate but braided, one rising as the other fell, one mocked and one triumphant, yet both necessary to the great cycle of the world. And though Hunahpu and Ixbalanque became heroes sung in every corner of the land, Hun Batz's presence never left their shadow. For art is longer than victory, and memory longer than triumph. The twins might conquer Xibalba, but Hun Batz remained in every cry of the jungle, in every glyph carved upon stone, in every song sung at dawn. Their mockery had birthed eternity. The cities of the Maya rose like mountains carved by human hands. Step pyramids thrust upward from the jungle canopy, their stairways steep, their crowns crowned with shrines that touched the sky. Palaces sprawled across courtyards paved in white limestone. Walls glittered with painted murals, stelae stood tall like sentinels, every stone carved with glyphs. Yet within this grandeur, there was always the whisper of Hun Batz. In every temple, amid the gods of maize, of rain, of death, there were monkeys. Painted high upon walls, carved upon lintels, hidden in corners of codices, their faces stared with wide eyes, their mouths open in cries frozen forever. Some held brushes, some flutes, some drums. Others bent in poses of dance, tails curling like glyphs, fingers poised as if still in the act of creation. These were no ordinary animals. To the Maya who entered those temples, they were Hun Batz himself, not one but many scattered through every image, watching, guiding. The priests taught that when a worshipper lifted his eyes to the monkey gods on the walls, Hun Batz was looking back, reminding him of art's sacred burden. Kings too bowed to this memory. Rulers of great cities claimed descent not only from warriors and heroes, but from the divine scribes. They carried staffs adorned with monkey figures, wore headdresses with monkey faces gleaming in jade, and painted themselves in ceremonies as half-men, half-monkeys, bridging their flesh with the eternal form of Hun Batz. On feast days, they summoned dancers to perform the dance of the monkey, a ritual retelling of transformation. The dancers leapt from platform to platform, their voices shrieking, their hands clawing the air, until the plaza thundered with both fear and laughter. The people watched not as an audience but as participants, remembering that the cry of Hun Batz was still alive, still echoing in their bones. Even the glyphs themselves bore his mark. The monkey face appeared in inscriptions tied to song, to writing, to creation. Scribes marked their work with it as if signing their art not with their own names, but with Hun Batz's eternal signature. And when storms swept the cities, rain lashing the limestone, thunder shaking the temples, the people listened for the monkeys in the jungle. Their cries rose against the storm, deep and unbroken, weaving the voice of Hun Batz into the rhythm of the rain. In this way, every temple became not only a house of stone, but a house of memory. Kings might die, dynasties might crumble, but the monkey faces carved into the walls endured. And through them Hun Batz endured. The god had fallen, yes. The god had been mocked, yes. But he had also become eternal, painted into the very bones of the cities. Wherever the Maya built, Hun Batz lived. The cities of the Maya were more than stone and jungle. They were theaters of eternity, where rulers sought to embody gods, and where scribes bound the fleeting present into the permanence of glyphs. In both of these roles, king and scribe, Hun Batz's shadow stretched long. The scribes were the first to feel him most intimately. Bent over their bark paper codices, their faces lit by the trembling flame of oil lamps, they carried the burden of memory. Every stroke of the brush was an act of creation, a sacred labor that tied the mortal world to the divine. They whispered to Hun Batz before they began, "Guide my hand, you who first held the brush. Let the lines flow as they flowed from your fingers." To them, Hun Batz was not distant, but immediate, the breath in their lungs, the steadiness in their wrists. They painted him often in their works, hidden in margins, half glyph and half being, as though acknowledging the god who leaned over their shoulders. For a scribe, Hun Batz was both inspiration and warning. He had been a master of art, but pride had undone him. The scribe who grew arrogant risked the same fate, his gift twisted into shame. Thus every page became a prayer for balance, every brushstroke an act of humility. The kings, however, saw Hun Batz differently. To them he was not merely a patron of art, but a source of power. In ceremonies that bound their rule to the heavens, kings invoked him as proof of their legitimacy. They stood upon temple steps, flanked by dancers in monkey masks, declaring, "I am of the lineage of Hun Batz, child of art, keeper of memory." For in Maya thought, rulership was not only conquest but creation. A king was a scribe of the world, a dancer of destiny, one who inscribed the order of the cosmos onto the body of his people. To claim Hun Batz was to claim mastery of that sacred act. In stele carved with glyphs, kings were shown beside monkeys holding brushes or flutes. In murals, rulers painted themselves with tails curling from their backs, faces part human, part monkey, declaring themselves both men and echoes of the god. In jade ornaments and obsidian carvings, the monkey face glimmered as emblem of divine authority. Thus Hun Batz stood in two worlds at once. To the scribe, he was the trembling of the hand, the ink upon the page, the whisper of humility. To the king he was a mask of power, a patron whose laughter and cries declared their reign eternal. And in both he was present. He was the god in the canopy, the shadow on the temple walls, the breath between ink and stone. Hun Batz lived in every page. Hun Batz lived in every crown. The cities of the Maya were not silent stones. They were alive with rhythm, color, and sound. On feast days, when the calendar turned to sacred cycles, when the sun marked moments chosen by the gods, the plazas thundered with celebration. And among the most vibrant of these rituals were those held in honor of Hun Batz, the festivals of the monkey. At dawn, the air was already thick with the smell of burning copal. The smoke rose in pale spirals from clay braziers, curling around the faces of carved stele until the gods themselves seemed to breathe. Musicians gathered with drums of hollowed wood, flutes carved from bone, rattles filled with seeds, their instruments ready to awaken the plaza. From the temples emerged the dancers. They wore masks of monkeys, carved from wood and painted in brilliant colors. Wide eyes staring, mouths open in eternal cry, teeth gleaming white. Their bodies were covered in skins and feathers, their hands painted black to resemble fur. Some carried brushes, some held flutes, others bore drums upon their shoulders. At the first beat of the drum, the dancers began to move. They leapt and swung their arms as though climbing unseen trees. They crouched low, then sprang upward in sudden arcs, tails of painted cloth trailing behind them. Their cries filled the air, shrill and guttural, echoing the howler monkeys in the canopy beyond the city walls. The crowd answered with cheers, laughter, and reverent awe. For though the dance was playful, it carried weight. Each leap, each howl, each painted mask was a retelling of the god's fate. The climb up the tree, the mocking laughter of the hero twins, the shudder of transformation, the eternal echo. Children sat on their mothers' shoulders, wide-eyed, pointing at the dancers. Elders clutched their staffs, nodding, whispering prayers under their breath. The priests stood at the temple steps, chanting the lineage of Hun Batz, reminding all that art itself was a gift, and every gift a burden. As the dance reached its height, torches were lit. The plaza blazed with firelight, shadows of the dancers stretching long against the walls of the temples. The cries of the performers merged with the cries of the monkeys in the jungle, until it was impossible to tell where ritual ended and the forest began. Offerings followed. Bowls of maize, cacao, feathers, and jade were placed before the altars. Blood, drawn from ears and tongues, was sprinkled upon the flames, the smoke carrying the gift upward. All the while, the dancers continued, their movements now slower, solemn, as though embodying the sacred sorrow of Hun Batz's fall. And then, at last, silence. The drums ceased. The dancers froze, masks turned upward toward the sky. The crowd held its breath. And from beyond the plaza, from the jungle canopy, the howlers answered. Their cries rolled like thunder through the night, deep and unbroken, shaking the stones beneath the people's feet. The festival was complete. Hun Batz had been honored. The god's voice had joined theirs, the bridge between men and gods renewed once more. These festivals were not rare. They pulsed through the calendar, marking seasons, harvests, victories. Each time the monkey dancers leapt, the drums thundered, the cries rose. And each time the people remembered, art is not entertainment alone, but covenant. Hun Batz lived in their laughter, in their dances, in their offerings. Through festival he was not only remembered, he was present, alive, among them still. The Maya knew that every act of creation was dangerous. To draw a glyph, to carve a stone, to lift a song into the air was to touch the realm of the gods. No hand could do this work alone. The artist was a vessel, a conduit, a bridge. And so, in the solitude of their craft, they called upon Hun Batz. In the cool shadows of workshops, where sunlight entered only in slivers, scribes and painters bent over sheets of amati bark. They ground pigments from cinnabar, indigo, and crushed jade, mixing them in bowls of clay. Before dipping their brushes, they whispered a prayer. Steady my hand, Hun Batz. Guide my eyes. Let my glyphs remember as you remembered. Let no arrogance stain my work. Sometimes they carved his likeness into the handles of their brushes, tiny monkey faces grinning back at them. Others tied small amulets shaped like curled tails around their wrists, believing it kept their strokes pure. A mistake, they said, was not merely error but disrespect, for to falter in art was to dishonor Hun Batz himself. Sculptors too sought him. With obsidian chisels they struck stone, each blow deliberate, rhythmic, like the beat of a drum. Before beginning, they set offerings at the foot of the block. A few drops of blood, a feather, a morsel of maize. Only then did they dare strike, for the stone was alive, and Hun Batz's spirit dwelled in every shape waiting to emerge. Musicians felt him in the breath of their flutes, in the skin of their drums, in the rattle of shells and seeds. They said the first sound of every instrument belonged not to them but to Hun Batz. They played the opening notes slowly, reverently, as invocation before letting their melodies soar. Even weavers whispered his name. As they pulled threads across the loom, they saw the weaving as dance, as writing, as song. The patterns they created, jaguars, serpents, birds, were not only decoration but prayers, and Hun Batz, patron of art, watched through their fingers. And in every act of creation, there was fear as well as reverence. For Hun Batz was not only patron but warning. The artists remembered his pride, his laughter, his fall. They knew that to boast of skill was to invite ruin. A humble heart was the only vessel through which beauty could flow. Thus their devotion was double-edged. Love for the God who gave them their gifts, and trembling before the God who reminded them of their limits. Hun Batz lived not only in festivals and temples, but in the small moments of solitude, in the scratch of the brush, the thud of the chisel, the hum of the loom. In every workshop, in every hut, in every whispered prayer he was there. And so every act of art became more than human. It became communion. Night in the Maya world was never empty. Fires burned low in the courtyards, their light flickering upon faces gathered close. Families sat in circles, the old and the young pressed together, while the stars blazed overhead in countless patterns. And in those hours between day and dream the stories were told. Hun Batz's tale was among the oldest, and it was told with both laughter and reverence. The elders began in solemn tones, speaking of his gifts, the voice that tamed the forest, the hands that painted the first glyphs, the body that danced the rhythms of the cosmos. The children listened wide-eyed as though they could still see him among them, striding with brush and flute. Then came the turn, the pride, the mockery, the climb into the tree, the transformation. Here the storyteller's voices shifted, mocking and shrill, imitating the laughter of the hero twins. The children laughed nervously even as they shivered, for they knew that such laughter had power. Finally came the howls. The elders leaned back, tilting their heads toward the forest, and imitated the cries of the monkeys, deep and resonant, until the night air itself seemed to answer. The children clutched their blankets, torn between fear and awe. And then, in quiet tones, the story ended with its lesson. Hun Batz fell, but he did not vanish. He became the voice in the trees. He became the hand in the glyph. He became the song in the flute. He lives whenever we remember. Do not forget him, for he does not forget us. So the memory endured. Hun Batz lived in every story told by firelight. He lived in lullabies sung to infants, where mothers whispered, "Sleep, little one, Hun Batz is singing in the trees." He lived in the games of children who swung on vines, shrieking with joy, believing themselves to be the God reborn in play. He lived in the carved walls where his monkey face gazed down on plazas long after kings had turned to dust. In this way Hun Batz became more than myth. He became memory itself. A living current passed from voice to voice, from generation to generation, shaping how the people saw art, pride, humility, and transformation. Cities rose. Cities fell. Empires flourished and were swallowed by jungle. But the howler monkey still cried at dawn, and the people who listened still remembered. Hun Batz was never forgotten. He was not only patron of art, not only warning against pride. He was the eternal storyteller, the memory of the people carried in breath, in voice, in howl. The God had become the story. And the story had become the God. The cities rose high, but even the tallest pyramids cannot hold back time. The Maya world, once blazing with color and sound, began to fade. Plazas that had thundered with festivals grew empty. Murals painted in sacred blues and reds peeled beneath the weight of centuries. Temples crumbled, their stones swallowed by roots and vines. The voices of kings and priests, once proud and unbroken, sank into silence. The jungle returned, slow and patient, wrapping its green fingers around the temples, climbing their steps, covering their glyphs. Trees grew from the cracks of palaces. Birds nested in altars. Jaguars prowled in courtyards where once dancers had stamped their feet. Yet amid this collapse, something remained. When the wind blew through the canopy, when the mist clung to the sabas, when dawn broke in shafts of gold through the ruins, the sound came. Long, guttural, unearthly, the cry of the howler monkeys. Hun Batz had not fallen with the cities. He had not crumbled with the stone, nor faded with the murals. His voice still shook the air, rolling over ruins and rivers alike. His howls filled the silence left by vanished kings as if to say, dynasties end, temples fall. But art, memory, song, they remain. The people who lived still in the villages, though the great cities had emptied, continued to whisper his name. They pointed to the ruins and said, Hun Batz is here. He watches. He remembers. And when the monkeys cried at dusk, they heard not only animals but gods. The fall of the cities was not the fall of Hun Batz. He endured. He always endured. Travelers who entered the abandoned plazas told the same story. At dawn, when the mist was thick and the ruins glistened with dew, the monkeys cried. The sound rose above broken stelae, above temples cracked with vines, echoing from stone to stone as if the city itself were alive again. The ruins became stages for Hun Batz. His voice replaced the missing chants of priests, his cries filled the silence where once drums had thundered. Those who listened closely said they could almost hear patterns in the howls. A rhythm, a memory, a song hidden in sorrow. Children, wandering too close to the old temples, returned trembling, saying they had seen monkey shapes watching them from the branches, their eyes glowing in the twilight. The elders smiled knowingly. Hun Batz is there, they said. He guards the memory. He does not let it fade. And so the ruins were not empty. They were alive, filled with echoes, with shadows, with the eternal presence of the God who had once painted glyphs and sung the jungle into silence. Hun Batz did not need priests to call his name. He did not need kings to carve his image. His presence was older, deeper, stronger. He was in the voice of the monkey, in the cry that would never cease. The Maya believed that time was not a line but a circle, a wheel turning endlessly. The past was not gone but present, repeating, weaving itself back into the now. Hun Batz was proof. Every cry of the monkeys was a reminder. Every glyph preserved his shadow. Every festival, even in villages far from fallen cities, carried his dance. Hun Batz became the keeper of memory, not only of art but of the people themselves. When kingdoms crumbled and names of kings were forgotten, his story still remained. When stone walls fell and carvings wore smooth under rain, his cry still echoed in the canopy. He was memory that could not be erased. Grandmothers sang his story to children as lullabies. Hunters invoked him before entering the forest, asking that the monkeys not mock them but bless their steps. Artists whispered to him still, even in times when their pigments faded and their brushes were poor. The people may have lost their cities, but they never lost Hun Batz. He lived in their voices. He lived in their silence. He lived in every dawn howl that rolled across the jungle, deeper than memory, older than ruin. Centuries passed. New peoples came, new tongues spoke, new gods were named. Yet Hun Batz endured, veiled but present. His cries rolled through forests that men no longer understood but still feared. Travelers from foreign lands entered the jungles and froze when they heard the howls, believing them demons, spirits, monsters. But the people knew better. They said, "It is Hun Batz. He has never left us." And indeed, in every sound of the jungle, in every echo of art, in every persistence of memory, Hun Batz was alive. His fate had made him eternal, not by temples, not by power, but by transformation. He was not bound to a throne. He was not chained to a dynasty. He was woven into life itself, into breath, into sound, into memory. And even now, when the jungle howls at dawn, Hun Batz speaks. He speaks through the monkeys. He speaks through the art left behind. He speaks through the stories still told. His presence endures across centuries, a god who cannot be forgotten, because his essence is not locked in stone but in voice. At last, the myth closes where it began, with sound. The world has changed. The cities lie in ruin, swallowed by vines. The kings are dust, their names cracked and unreadable on stele. Yet the jungle is alive. The rivers still run. The sabres still rise. And at dawn the howler monkeys cry. Their voices rise in waves, rolling through mist and leaf, shaking the silence of morning. They cry with sorrow, with laughter, with pride, with humility. They cry with the voice of Hun Batz. Hun Batz is there, not only in myth, not only in glyph, but in the living sound of the world. His howl is eternal, carried through time, echoing in every age, reminding all who hear that art is sacred, memory is eternal, and every fall can be transformed into song. He is the patron of scribes, the guardian of artists, the warning against pride, the echo of creation. He is the voice in the trees, the laughter in the shadows, the hand behind every brushstroke, the cry that wakes the jungle. Hun Batz endures. Hun Batz will always endure. For as long as the monkeys howl, the god still speaks. And as long as the god still speaks, humanity will remember. The eternal howl rolls on. The night sky was the greatest codex of the Maya. Every star a glyph, every constellation a story, every movement of the heavens a voice of the gods. And among these patterns the people said Hun Batz still walked. They dreamed of him often. His face, half man, half monkey, appeared in visions. His long arms stretched across the stars like branches of the ceiba tree. His howl rippled through the night sky, not in sound but in trembling constellations, as if even the stars remembered his cry. The people believed that Hun Batz sent omens in dreams. When a scribe doubted his hand, Hun Batz appeared in sleep, guiding his brush with spectral fingers. When a dancer stumbled in ritual, Hun Batz visited with eyes burning, teaching new steps and visions of fire and shadow. And when kings grew arrogant, Hun Batz came not in beauty but in terror, shrieking in their ears until they woke trembling, humbled by the sound. Children too whispered of him. They said they felt his presence on nights when the moon was thin, when the jungle rustled with unseen movement. They claimed to see monkey shapes sitting at the edges of their huts, eyes glowing amber, watching, listening. Their parents did not dismiss these stories. Instead they nodded solemnly and said, Hun Batz visits those who listen. Be grateful. Be humble. The monkeys themselves were seen as his messengers. Their cries at night were not random but deliberate, warnings of rain or famine, omens of journeys safe or doomed. To ignore them was folly, to mock them was dangerous. For Hun Batz was not only a god of art, he was a god of memory, and memory never forgets. And so the nights of the Maya were never empty. Even in silence, the people knew Hun Batz walked among them. In their dreams, in their omens, in the voices of the jungle that did not sleep. The Maya believed that dreams were not illusions but journeys. Sleep was a crossing of thresholds, a passage through hidden doors that opened onto other realms. In dreams, one might walk the roads of Xibalba, stand before ancestors, or hear the voices of gods. And among all the gods who visited, none was more feared nor more revered than Hun Batz. Scribes told of him appearing beside their beds, his monkey face half shrouded in shadow, his eyes glimmering like obsidian in firelight. He said no words but handed them brushes dripping with ink that glowed like stars. When they awoke, their hands were restless, eager to paint glyphs as if some invisible force still guided them. What they wrote often revealed truths they had not known before. Prophecies, names of ancestors, warnings hidden in the flow of lines. Musicians dreamed of him differently. They said Hun Batz came leaping through forests of stars, his long arms striking invisible drums, his cries forming melodies no human ear had heard. Upon waking, these musicians reached for their flutes and drums, and the music that poured forth was wild, haunting, sacred, as if Hun Batz had planted the rhythm within their bones. Kings dreamed of him with dread. For when Hun Batz came to rulers, it was often in anger. His cry shook their sleep, his laughter echoed with scorn, and his shadow loomed over their thrones. He reminded them of their fragility, of the pride that had once led him to fall. Some kings awoke humbled, ruling with gentler hands. Others ignored the warnings, and soon their cities cracked under drought, rebellion, or the slow patience of time. But children dreamed of him with wonder. They said Hun Batz appeared in playful form, swinging from vines of moonlight, tossing them fruits made of stars. His laughter was not cruel but kind, echoing like bells. These children often grew to become artists, their lives forever marked by the god's playful visitation. Thus Hun Batz lived in the dreams of the people. He was a teacher, a judge, a comforter, a terror. His presence proved what the elders always said: the gods were not distant. They walked in the canopy, in the ruins, in the blood, in the dreams. And Hun Batz, more than most, was close. He was a god of art, and art always speaks in dreams. When the people awoke and shared their visions, they listened carefully. For every dream of Hun Batz was a glyph written not on paper, but in the soul. The Maya did not separate memory from prophecy. To remember was also to foresee, for time was a circle, and what had been would come again. Hun Batz, the keeper of memory, therefore became also a prophet. His cries, his shadows, his dreams shaping the paths of men long before they knew they walked them. The omens were many and they were feared. When the monkeys cried at noon, when their voices split the heat of day with unnatural ferocity, the people said famine was near. The god was warning that the maize would wither, that hunger would creep into the villages like a shadow. Families redoubled their offerings, painting bowls with glyphs of Hun Batz, leaving them at the edge of the forest so that he might relent. When the monkeys cried in the dead of night, louder than thunder, the elders whispered that war was coming. Hun Batz had seen the obsidian blades flashing, the spears rising, the blood soaking into temple stones. Such nights were heavy with fear, for the cries rang like the horns of battle. But not all omens were grim. When the monkeys howled at dawn with unusual rhythm, short bursts, pauses, then long waves of sound, the people said Hun Batz was teaching a new song, a rhythm to be captured and repeated in drums. Musicians listened intently, mimicking the pattern until it became a new chant for festivals. The god was not only warning, he was giving. Dreams carried prophecies too. A scribe once dreamed of Hun Batz holding a scroll made not of bark but of flame. On it were painted glyphs that shifted and changed, never still, glowing like embers. When the scribe awoke, he could not recall the details, but his hand moved as if possessed, painting a codex unlike any before it. That book was kept in the temple as a sacred relic, for its glyphs spoke of the rising and fall of dynasties, of drought and rain, of the unbroken cycle of life. A queen heavy with child dreamed of Hun Batz shrieking above her head. In the dream, he placed his hand upon her belly and laughed, not in cruelty but in strange joy. When her son was born, he grew to be a dancer of unrivaled skill, his movements echoing the leaps of the monkey god. The people whispered that Hun Batz himself had blessed the womb. And when a king ignored the omens, refusing to heed the cries, the prophecy fulfilled itself. His armies marched to war despite the monkey's howls of warning, and they fell in battle, slaughtered in the ravines. The survivors said the monkeys had screamed above the carnage, their voices mingling with the death cries of men, proving the god had spoken true. Thus Hun Batz became a prophet, unwilling yet unerring. His voice was the echo of the cycle, the howl of the future, the warning that time itself repeats. He did not speak in words but in cries, in rhythms, in visions that unsettled the soul. The people learned to listen. For to ignore Hun Batz was to walk blind into fate. The Maya believed that nothing escaped the eyes of the gods. Every act, every word, every silence was recorded in the hidden scrolls of the heavens. But of all divine watchers, none was closer, none more present than Hun Batz. For he did not dwell only in the sky, distant and untouchable. He sat in the canopy, in the shadows of trees, in the ruins where vines coiled like serpents. His eyes, round, luminous, reflecting torchlight and moonlight alike, were everywhere. Hun Batz was the witness. Hunters felt his gaze when they raised their bows. If they mocked the animals they pursued, the monkeys would shriek from the trees, and the hunters would miss their shots, their arrows falling harmlessly to the ground. Hun Batz saw your pride, the elders would say, and turned the forest against you. Lovers felt his gaze when they whispered in secret beneath the sabas. If their words were true, the monkeys above were silent, watching with stillness. But if their hearts held betrayal, the monkeys shrieked suddenly, breaking the silence with a sound that pierced the soul. The lovers trembled, for they knew Hun Batz had witnessed their falsehood. Even kings felt his gaze. On nights when ceremonies ended, when the crowds were gone and the torches burned low, they stood alone in their palaces and heard it, the long howl rolling over the city, rising from the canopy. It was not a sound of praise nor of mockery but of remembrance. Hun Batz was watching. He carried their deeds into the eternal memory of the gods, where no crown could erase them. The scribes knew this most of all. As they traced glyphs, they felt the invisible weight of Hun Batz behind their shoulders. If their hand faltered in arrogance, if they dared to sign their work too proudly, the ink would spill or the brush would split. "He sees you," they whispered. "He knows." Children were taught to respect the gaze. When they played too loudly in the courtyards, their mothers pointed to the canopy, "Quiet. Hun Batz is watching. Do not mock or he will remember." And the children hushed, peering into the trees where sometimes, just sometimes, two round eyes seemed to glow in the leaves. But Hun Batz was not only witness of fault. He saw beauty too. He recorded not just sin but song, not just arrogance but humility. When a dancer moved with true devotion, the monkeys fell silent, their eyes fixed as though enraptured. When a singer raised her voice in sorrow, the howls rose to meet her, weaving her grief into the eternal sound. Hun Batz remembered everything. The cruelty, the tenderness, the pride, the devotion. His memory was not judgment alone, but record, the living archive of the world. The Maya said that when they died, when their souls crossed the rivers of Xibalba, Hun Batz was there. He opened his mouth, and the howls of the jungle poured forth, recounting their lives. Every act, every song, every silence, all remembered, all spoken. For Hun Batz was more than artist, more than prophet. He was the witness, the one who forgets nothing. The eyes in the canopy, the howl in the ruins, the voice of memory itself. The Maya did not believe that the world was divided cleanly between waking and sleep. To them, both states were paths along the same road, two halves of a single journey. The dream fed the day, and the day returned to the dream. To live was to move between them endlessly. And Hun Batz was master of that threshold. He was the god of art, and art itself was dream made flesh. Every glyph was a dream drawn in ink. Every song was a dream given breath. Every dance was a dream carved into the body. The artist did not invent, he listened, he dreamed, he channeled. And who whispered those dreams? Hun Batz. For this reason, the people said Hun Batz was never entirely absent. Whether they slept or woke, whether they painted or tilled the fields, whether they danced or mourned, he was there, shaping, recording, remembering. His voice echoed in both silence and sound, in both dream and waking life. Some said the whole world itself was Hun Batz's dream. The jungle, the rivers, the maze, the stars, all woven from his endless howl, his song of memory. The people were not separate from him but dancers moving within his vision, scribes painting on the scroll of his dream. When the monkeys cried in the canopy, they were not simply warning of storms or famine. They were reminding men that they lived inside the god's unbroken dream. This idea filled both fear and comfort. Fear because it meant that nothing was hidden, nothing forgotten. Every secret, every pride, every shame was part of his vision. Comfort because it meant that nothing was lost. Every song sung, every glyph painted, every prayer whispered was preserved in the eternal dream. The elders told children, when you sleep, Hun Batz watches. When you wake, Hun Batz remembers. There is no end, no escape. You live in his dream, and when you die, you return to it. Thus Hun Batz was no longer just a monkey god in the canopy, no longer only the cry in the ruins. He was the dream unending, the cycle of memory itself, the eternal loom on which all lives were threads. His howl was the sound of the dream woven around them, unbroken, eternal. And so the chapter of dreams closed with revelation. Hun Batz is not only the god of art, of prophecy, of witness. He is the dreamer of the world. The people dreamed because he dreamed. The world lived because he remembered. And the howl at dawn was the eternal reminder that the dream never ends. The jungle of today is not silent ruin. It breathes. It pulses. It is alive with the same voice that haunted the ancient nights. Walk beneath the ceiba trees and you feel it. The air heavy with mist, the ground soft with leaves, the hidden rivers murmuring below the roots. Parrots wheel overhead, their feathers flashing green and scarlet. Insects hum like invisible choirs. Jaguars prowl in silence, their paws leaving no mark in the soil. And then, from deep within the canopy it comes, the howl. Long, guttural, rolling like thunder across the forest. The monkeys cry, and their voices ripple through the trees, shaking branches, startling birds into flight. It is not merely animal sound. It is primeval, ancient, older than the ruins, older than the stones. Those who hear it for the first time freeze, their hearts pounding, for the sound does not feel of this world. Feels like the voice of memory itself. The locals know this well. They stop what they are doing when the howls begin. Farmers pause in their fields, machetes resting at their sides, and bow their heads. Children hush their games, listening wide-eyed. Elders lift their eyes toward the canopy and whisper softly. Hun Batz is speaking. For them the monkeys are not beasts. They are the god's mask, his living form, the proof that the myth still breathes in the world. Every cry at dawn, every howl at dusk, is Hun Batz reminding them. He has not left, he has not faded, he is here, watching, remembering. Even the ruins still carry him. Tourists who wander through broken plazas hear the cries at dawn and shudder, not knowing the story but feeling its weight. Guides smile and explain, that is the voice of Hun Batz, the monkey god. He was once a man, a master of art. Now he cries to remind us of what was and what still is. The jungle is his temple. The canopy is his throne. The howls are his eternal liturgy. Hun Batz never needed crowns or armies. His power is in sound, in memory, in the living breath of the forest. And so in the present as in the past, the howl returns. The voice of Hun Batz rolls on, unbroken, eternal. The Maya world did not vanish with the fall of the great cities. Its people remain. Its languages still ripple in the air like rivers of sound, carrying the weight of ancestors. Its rituals still burn with incense and song. Its myths still live, passed not in books alone but in voices, in memory, in the rhythm of daily life. And among these living threads, Hun Batz endures. In villages scattered across the highlands and lowlands, his name is still whispered at dawn, when the monkeys cry from the canopy. Farmers preparing to enter the fields pause at the edge of the forest, listening. If the howls are strong and unbroken, they nod, assured that the day will be blessed. If the cries are harsh and discordant, they take it as a warning, leaving offerings of maize or cacao beneath the sabas before daring to step forward. During festivals, dancers still don monkey masks carved of wood, painted in vivid reds, blacks, and whites. They leap across the plazas in circles, their arms swinging, their voices shrieking to mimic the howls of the canopy. Children laugh, but the elders remind them, do not forget, this is Hun Batz. We dance because he dances through us. Storytellers keep his tale alive by firelight. In the cool nights, with stars scattered across the heavens like glyphs, they recount the old story, how Hun Batz and Hun Shaoan were transformed by the hero twins, how laughter became curse, how curse became sacred voice. The children gasp when they hear of the climb into the tree, tremble when they hear the first howl, and fall silent when the elders say, even now Hun Batz cries in the trees. Listen and you will hear him. Musicians too carry his echo. In the marimba, in the drums, in the flutes they hear his voice. The rhythms of the jungle become the rhythms of their songs, and when the music rises, they say Hun Batz is present, the invisible performer among them. Even in modern times, when cities of glass and iron rise in the world beyond the jungle, the Maya remember. They teach their children, the monkey you hear at dawn is not only animal. It is God. It is Hun Batz who remembers us. Thus the echo continues, not as relic, not as forgotten myth, but as living breath. Hun Batz survives in the sound of the jungle, in the voices of the people, in every festival, every story, every song. The God who once was mocked, who once was transformed, is not lost to time. He is alive. He is among them still. For the Maya, words were not only sounds. They were sacred vessels, alive with spirit, as real and powerful as stone or maize. To speak a story was to breathe life into the past, to call the ancestors into the present. And no god was more bound to this sacred power than Hun Batz. He was remembered not only as patron of art and dance, but as guardian of story itself. His howl was not just voice but memory, the echo that carried tales through centuries. To tell a myth was to open the canopy and let his cry enter the circle of listeners. In the villages, when elders gathered the children by firelight, they invoked Hun Batz before beginning. May his memory guide my tongue, may his howl give strength to my voice. Then they spoke the ancient tales, of the hero twins in Zabalba, of the maize gods rising from the earth, of the lords of rain and fire. But always, somewhere in the telling, Hun Batz appeared, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as witness, sometimes as the very voice of the story itself. It was said that when a storyteller faltered, when his memory failed, Hun Batz whispered in his ear. The words returned, flowing like water, the images blooming like painted glyphs. The god would not allow the story to be lost, for he remembered everything and his memory was endless. Hun Batz was not gentle in this. If a storyteller grew arrogant, claiming the story as his own invention, the monkeys would howl suddenly from the trees, drowning his voice. The fire would sputter, the children would grow restless. It was the god's warning, do not forget. The story is mine. I am its keeper. But when the teller spoke with humility, when he gave the story back to the ancestors, the howls wove with the words. The jungle itself seemed to listen, the fire burning brighter, the children transfixed as if the god himself leaned close. In this way, Hun Batz became the patron not just of art, but of storytelling itself. Every word spoken across generations, every myth remembered, every prayer whispered, all passed through him, guarded in his unbroken memory. The people said that when a story dies, Hun Batz howls louder, mourning its loss. But when a story is remembered, his howl softens, weaving with the teller's voice, making the memory eternal. Thus he is the keeper of stories, not written in books alone but in voices, in dreams, in the breath of the people. Hun Batz does not allow forgetting. He howls so that the stories will never end. The jungle is not only trees and rivers. It is a library. Every leaf is a page, every bird call a syllable, every river a flowing line of ink. And at the heart of this living codex, the Maya said, dwells Hun Batz, the great archivist, the memory that never dies. They believed the jungle itself was his scroll. The monkeys that howled at dawn were not only calling to one another, they were reciting the stories of the world. Each cry was a line of poetry, each rhythm a glyph painted in sound. When the canopy roared with their voices, it was as if the whole library of creation had been opened, the god reading aloud from its endless pages. Travelers who ventured deep into the forest spoke of strange sensations. Some said they heard voices woven into the howls, not random noise but the cadence of stories like chants half remembered. Others swore they saw visions in the mist, glyphs floating in the air, dancing between branches, dissolving as they approached. The wise among them knew the truth. They had glimpsed Hun Batz's forest of memory. The elders taught that in this hidden archive, nothing was lost. The first songs sung by human lips still echoed in the cries of parrots. The first glyphs painted still glowed faintly on the bark of sabas. The laughter of children long dead was woven into the murmur of streams. Hun Batz gathered it all, storing every sound, every story, every breath. This was why forgetting was impossible. Even when men ceased to tell a tale, the jungle remembered. The monkeys howled it back, the rivers sang it, the wind carried it. Hun Batz had etched it into the forest itself. The forest was temple. The forest was book. The forest was Hun Batz's body. Hunters entering its depths made offerings before stepping forward. A drop of blood, a maize kernel, a whispered prayer. They knew that every step they took was upon the sacred pages of the god's archive. Every word they spoke was recorded. Every silence was preserved. And when storms raged, tearing branches, flooding rivers, the people said Hun Batz was turning the pages of his living book, shaking loose old stories, revealing new ones, ensuring that the cycle of memory continued unbroken. Thus the forest itself became myth. It was not only home of beasts, but the eternal codex of the god. To enter it was to walk inside the memory of Hun Batz, to feel his eyes upon you, to hear his voice in every howl. And when the monkeys cried together, rolling thunder through the canopy, the people listened with reverence. For they were hearing the library of eternity, sung aloud by its keeper. Hun Batz does not write in stone or ink alone. He writes in leaf, in wind, in voice, in silence. The forest is his memory. The howl is his song. The people say the gods do not die. They withdraw, they change their masks, they sleep in stone or leaf, but they do not die. And Hun Batz above all is proof. For his voice has never ceased. Through drought and conquest, through silence and ruin, through centuries when the jungle grew thick over the bones of temples, Hun Batz has howled. His cry has never been silenced. Some say he waits. He waits in the canopy, perched upon branches high above human reach, watching with eyes that see across time. His howl is not only memory but call, a summons to those willing to listen. He speaks to the scribes who still carve glyphs in secret. He speaks to the musicians who hear strange rhythms in the jungle and shape them into song. He speaks to the children who stop their play to stare upward in awe when the monkeys cry at dusk. Hun Batz waits for hearts humble enough to remember, for ears brave enough to hear. The Maya tell that in times of great change his voice grows louder. When kingdoms fall, when storms break the land, when new peoples arrive with strange gods, the monkeys howl with a fury that shakes the sky. These are not accidents. They are proclamations. Hun Batz cries out to remind the world, I am still here. You cannot bury memory. You cannot silence song. In some villages, it is said that shamans can still walk with him. They drink the bitter brews of vision, close their eyes, and hear the jungle become a temple of sound. There Hun Batz waits, his long arms stretched, his face shining like obsidian in firelight. He teaches them songs forgotten by men, stories erased from stone, secrets that only the eternal remember. When they return, trembling, they share what they have heard, and the people recognize the voice of the god. Even beyond the Maya lands, travelers have felt him. Those who wander the jungles at dawn, hearing the howls ripple through the mist, find their hearts unsettled, their breath caught in their throats. They cannot explain why the sound feels like sorrow, why it feels like laughter, why it feels like being remembered. But the Maya smile at this and say, You have heard Hun Batz. You have been seen by him. You will not forget. Thus the return of the god is not future, it is present. He has already returned because he never left. Every howl at dawn is his coming. Every cry at dusk is his presence. Every memory, every story, every song is his body alive in the world. Hun Batz does not belong to the past. He is here now, watching, crying, remembering. He waits for those who still carry art, who still honor story, who still listen to the voice in the trees. The god has returned. and he never truly left. All myths return to their dawn. And so does the story of Hun Batz. He began as a man gifted beyond measure. His hands birthed glyphs, his voice tamed the air into song, his body moved as though the stars themselves danced within him. He was the promise of art, the mirror of divine creation. But pride walked beside him. Pride whispered into his ear, heavy as smoke, sweet as honey. He mocked, he laughed, he forgot the weight of his gift. And the hero twins, his brothers, turned that pride into punishment. He climbed the tree and the tree became his fate. His body bent, his face stretched, his hands curled into blackened claws. The laughter that once charmed became the howl that haunted. He fell, not into death but into transformation. And yet, in the circle of myth, fall is not end. From that fall came eternity. From that howl came memory. From that curse came divinity. Hun Batz became more than man. He became voice. He became forest. He became dream. He became the unbroken circle of memory itself. Hun Batz is not confined to one place. He is thread woven across realms. In the heavens, his howl is heard in the rhythm of stars. Constellations shimmer with his steps, and the moon bends like the arc of his leap. The gods know him as memory incarnate, the witness who keeps their stories unforgotten. On earth he walks the canopy. His eyes shine in the shadows of leaves, his voice rolls across rivers and ruins. Farmers hear him in omens. Musicians hear him in rhythms. Children hear him in laughter. To all he is present, unseen yet undeniable. In Xibalba the lords of death cannot silence him. His howl pierces even the underworld, carrying the memory of those who enter. No soul is forgotten, for Hun Batz remembers. His cry echoes through the caverns, a reminder that death itself is only another thread in the loom. Thus he weaves the worlds together, heaven, earth, underworld. His voice binds them. His memory sustains them. His presence ensures that nothing is ever truly lost. Hun Batz is not only a god of art, but of truth. His story is a lesson carved into time itself. He teaches that gifts are burdens. To sing, to paint, to dance is sacred, but pride will twist the gift into ruin. Artists must walk humbly, for the hand that creates is never theirs alone. It is guided by something greater, something eternal. He teaches that memory is sacred. Nothing vanishes, nothing is forgotten. Every act, whether cruel or kind, is remembered. Hun Batz witnesses it all, and his howl carries it into eternity. He teaches that fall is not the end. To stumble, to fail, to be mocked, these are not final deaths. They are transformations. Hun Batz fell from grace, but in that fall he rose higher, became more eternal than kings or priests. His curse became divinity. He teaches that the world itself is dream. That every story, every sound, every silence is part of a vast and unending vision, woven by the God who howls at dawn. To live is to walk in that dream, to be remembered within it, to contribute a verse to its eternal chant. These are not old lessons. They are present still. And so we return to now. The jungle is alive. The ruins are alive. The people are alive. And Hun Batz is alive among them. His cry rises each morning, rolling through mist and canopy, startling birds into flight, shaking the air with the sound of memory. Travelers hear it and shiver, unable to name what they feel. The Maya hear it and bow their heads, whispering prayers of respect. Artists hear it and lift their hands, guided by an invisible rhythm. Children hear it and laugh, not in mockery but in joy, for the god is playing with them through the branches. Hun Batz is not past. He is present. He is the eternal God of art, of memory, of voice. His howl has never ceased. His eyes have never closed. His dream has never ended. He is with us still. Listen. At dawn, when the mist drifts over the sabas, when the air is cool and heavy with dew, when the light breaks over the ruins, listen. The monkeys howl. Long, deep, unearthly. Their cries ripple through the forest, echo against the stones, roll across rivers and valleys. That sound is not only animal. It is Hun Batz. It is memory. It is story. It is the eternal howl. He howls to remind us that nothing is lost. He howls to remind us that art endures. He howls to remind us that pride can fall, but from the fall rises eternity. Hun Batz howls because he remembers. Hun Batz howls because he dreams. Hun Batz howls because he lives. And as long as the jungle breathes, as long as voices rise, as long as memory endures, Hun Batz will never be silent. The myth is not ending. The myth is still being told. The howl is eternal. From the laughter of brothers was born the howl of gods. From pride was born memory. From a fall was born eternity. Hun Batz, the artist who became voice, the brother who became witness, the man who became the dreamer of the world. His cry rose through the ruins, through the forests, through the centuries. And it rises still. Listen, the jungle remembers. The monkeys howl at dawn and their voices are his. Hun Batz has never left us. He waits, he watches, he dreams. And through his howl we are remembered. This is not the end of the myth. This is the beginning of memory. For as long as the world sings, Hun Batz will howl. Eternal. Unbroken. Alive. Thank you for walking with us through the eternal story of Hun Batz. May his howl remind you of the power of memory, of art, and of the dreams that shape our world. Until the next legend, we leave you with the voice of the jungle and the cry of the eternal God.